Hello, my name is Thomas, and I am part of a small indie studio based in France, which is called Flying Out Games. And today I'd like to talk to you about our game Scourgebringer. And it is a game on which we try to have a focus on accessibility, because it is a very demanding game. And we tried a lot of things, some worked, some didn't, so here we go. So for our presentation, I am, like I said, called Thomas Altenberger, and I also go by the pen name on the internet by Mr. Helmut. And I like pizza, I like video games, and I am most likely the most stereotypical game developer you can find. But for a more formal presentation, I am an cognitive science researcher, so I have a PhD in user interaction design. And I used to work as a researcher, but I quit this kind of life because I was more into games and I wanted to make games. But I already have some kind of awareness about everything that is accessibility, user research, and so on. And so about 7 years ago, I co-founded a game studio which is called Flying Out Games. We make games, we make ports, and we also help other people making games. Our two biggest games so far are Neurovoider and Scourgebringer, with both of them have about 500,000 players, which is very, very big and cool at our scale. So we really have like a user base to work with in all kind of stuff. And so we really work directly with the community and with the players. And we have a lot of feedback in that regard. So it's really useful also for accessibility perspective. But before we talk about our game Scourgebringer, I'd just like to tell you a little story about how we came to really be aware about game accessibility. So about 10 years ago, it was before we founded Flying Out Games, and it was at maybe in the middle of my career in user research. And I was working on a game which is called Hoi. It's a Kinect game, and it was a dancing game, so with full body recognition, and you had to dance. And we showed this game at Game Festival, and there was a player with reduced mobility who dropped by and was very, very enthusiastic about the game. He really loved the game, but he just couldn't play. So he just dropped by and told me, your game looks awesome. I had a really good fun looking at people playing your game, and I just wish I could play too. And this is something that was like kind of a spark. And it motivated us to enhance this game, and we added a seated mode, so where you could play only with your arm and only with figures which didn't use too much of your arm. And this was the start of our story, but the main takeaway here is that many developers and many indie developers are not quite aware of accessibility. They know it exists, they know it is something that is really useful and for many players to be able to enjoy a game, but they don't quite have this kind of spark because they don't quite go to meet players. So the takeaway here is that go meet your players, and you'll almost always at any event meet at least one person which has some kind of difficulties getting into your game for some reason or other. And this is at this moment when you see someone willing to get into your game but just can't. So it's very different from not seeing the person, so if you can do it. So now Scourgebringer. So let's get into it, and just watching a small teaser trailer just for you to get a good picture of what we are talking about. Here we go. All right, and sorry if you hear a cat because I have like the most lunatic cat right now, but hopefully it's going to be fine. So Skullbringer, as you may have seen, it's a very demanding game. There is a lot of things going on. It's very fast, and there is a lot of enemies, bullets at the screen, and so on. So we knew from the start that our game would be demanding, but we wanted our game to be as accessible as possible. We wanted to make a challenging game, but which doesn't have any, at least as little barrier as possible for anyone to get into the game and eventually enjoy it. So we built the game from the ground up with a few things in mind. So first was having smooth controls. We wanted to empower players. We wanted the playable character to be very smooth, very easy to get into, and something that as soon as you get your hand on a game controller or anything, you just feel it. So this is one of the main things that we try to achieve. And for that, we also wanted for the game to have a very quick onboarding, for having something like very minimal set of things to learn to get into it, and with absolutely no surprise. No surprise in the sense that we didn't want it to have anything coming from the game which felt like being unfair. We wanted you to have all the information at every given time, and if something should go wrong, you can analyze the situation and not get feel like it is because of the game, and also highly readable, because there is a lot of things going on, and so even our direction was made in a way that we wanted things to be clear. So making the game fair. So the first thing was that we didn't want it to have any scrolling. So when you enter into a room in the game, everything is on a single screen. There is no scrolling, there is no threat coming from outside the screen. Everything happens just in front of your eyes. And we also kind of have put the action on the middle of the screen. We didn't want it to go on the full widescreen range. So we put the interface on the sides, but all the action is on the middle of the screen. So just to avoid having anything on your peripheral vision, we just wanted to have things right in front of you, and just so you can like concentrate on what's on the screen and directly into your arm focus. So we built the art direction to be very contrasted. So the background is always very dark, and the enemies always pops into different color than the environment and so on. And the game character is always have a tint close to white. So white is a color that is always reserved for the player. And we also have bullets, enemy projectiles, which are always of colors which are always linked to enemies and always to threats. So you can easily differentiate what is a part of the environment, what is an enemy, and where is your game character. That was the main focus when we designed the art direction. From a sound perspective, we wanted unique sound cues, so everything in the game has a unique sound cue, and even enemies, they don't attack out of the blue. They warn you when they are going to attack. They all have a dedicated animation for that, and they all have a unique sound cue to let you know that they are going to attack. It is a game where you have platforming elements, but you also have shooting elements. And so we knew from the start that mixing aiming on a platforming game was not going to do it. So there is a lot of example of games who tried and it didn't quite work. So what we wanted to do is introduce shooting, but shooting with absolutely no aiming. There is an auto aim in the game, and you don't have to aim. There is no need to have a second joystick, a second stick to aim at anything. And so this was one of the main stuff that we wanted to do for it to be very, very smooth and accessible in that regard. And of course, as many options and settings as possible to ease play or to customize anything. So just to give you an extent of what we did when we designed the art direction. So one of the basic stuff that we made is some kind of pinch test. So we built into the game a visualizer. So we just had to press on one key and we could like totally blur the game. And it was just to check if when the game moves, does you still know what is what, in the way that where is enemies, where are projectiles, and also on the UI kind of where is the map, and how many bullets do I still have on the left part of the screen, and so on. So this is the kind of stuff that we try to be conscious of, and so we try to build the game in that way. So it was very, very useful, and it was a very simple effect to implement. So it took a few minutes to do. So it doesn't cost much to do this kind of stuff, and it really helps a lot. So we also built the game with color blindness in mind. We didn't wanted to make a color blind mod, a dedicated mod. We really wanted to build our game and the color palette and the codes of the enemies and the attack and so on to be colorblind friendly. And we had the opportunity, we had the chance to have one of our colleagues in our office, which is colorblind. So he gave us a lot of feedback in regard to early development of the game. And up to the release of the early access of the game, we built all the content to be colorblind friendly. But at some point we failed because by the end of the development, we were in such a rush that we kind of made the assumption that since we built the early game with color blindness in mind, we could just like take the same rules that we already built on and build the end of the game with it without involving colorblind people. And this was a failure because there are a few occurrences of very late game enemies which are not colorblind friendly, and this one is an example. So the kind of green snake, flamey snake, when it attacks, it goes red. It blinks in red, so you can see what's going on. So if you are colorblind, you will most likely only see green, and so you don't know when this enemy is going to attack. This was one of the issues that slipped away, and the takeaway here is that even if you are confident in how you build the game in regard to colorblindness, the best is really to have players who you know are colorblind and add them to your playtesting pool, because it's really important. And the fun thing is that a few weeks ago we opened the game to a modification. And the very first mod that has been made into the game was to fix this enemy. And so now diving into the game settings. So just going to go through every kind of settings that we made. Some are very obvious and simple, and some maybe even a little less, but there is sometimes a story behind each of them. So the main thing was that disabling screen check is very obvious. Disabling and enabling vibration is very obvious, but sometimes you can't. And on this one, it's also kind of because of me, because I am 36 years old, but I already have like muscular issues like arthritis and so on. So when you play your own game every day, you kind of sometimes want to get this off. And I love to play with vibration, but I can't for the whole day long. In regard to sound, the main thing that we did is that you can switch your music style. So the game uses a dynamic music. So when there is no action, the music is calm. And when there is some action going on, a combat starts, bam, there is some very hard rock music and so on. And we figured that some players, it was too much stressful. It was too much of a cognitive charge to have like a stressful music and having a very demanding game. So what we did is we added an option to disable the dynamic music and just to keep the calm layer, and it worked great. We had some very cool positive feedback about this one. And in regard to controls, we made different things. So first, we added options to choose between toggling or to keep pressing for displaying stuff. For instance, you have the map of the game. You can push a button to display the map of the current level. And we just put options for you to, if you prefer, to keep a button down or to toggle. So personal preferences, but there is of course players who can't like keep pushing buttons and so on. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And also full rebind, and full rebind of both gamepad and keyboard and mouse. And but I'm going to be honest about this one. Even though it has a clear advantages in regard to accessibility, it is something that we did in regard to the players of Steam, because there is a small part of the players on Steam who are really, really picky if you don't propose full rebind. But it's not because of accessibility. They don't quite care about accessibility. This kind of player care more about, is your game a real PC game? And if it doesn't have a keyboard and mouse and full rebind, it's not a real PC game, and they're going to wreck you in the reviews. So basically it was mostly about this. So see, it's more like, yeah, it's something that we make, and of course it profits to everybody. So at some point when we released the game into early access, we've added a lot of analytics into the game because we wanted to know our player more. And we ended up having this demography. So 10% of players were absolutely wrecking the game. There were expert players, they were finishing the game very quickly, and they were really wanting to have more content. It was never enough, it was never enough difficult, and they wanted just more. And 80% of players were doing just fine. They were in the zone, and it was just cool. So this was our core target, and these were the players that we just wanted to keep entertaining. And 10% of players were struggling, but struggling a lot. They really found the game to be very, very difficult. It was a strict barrier, and they couldn't even pass the first level out of 6. And so this was the problem. So our goal when we continued to develop the game was to bring the people who were struggling to upgrade into the comfort zone. And for the 10% who were wrecking the game, we just added more settings to more difficulties and so on. So what we did is that from the both perspective, we tried to integrate what we could do in terms of accessibility and difficulty directly into the story of the game, into diegetic elements. And for instance, what we added is an unplayable character who sometimes pops if you are having difficulty. So we added some kind of things into the game which tracks your performances and kind of try to know when you are struggling, if you are doing better, if you are getting more into the game, if you are going faster and so on. So we are kind of tracking how we are doing into the game. And if the game kind of knows that you are like a bit struggling, we are making this character to appear, and it's a very cheerful character. We'll just drop by and say, "Hey, looks like you need a hand, so here you go." And it just gave you some bonuses items for you to start a game and just like having some kind of bootstrap. And we also used this non-playable character to empower players who were very good. So players who were like very fast and trying to speedrun the game, this character was appearing in later levels and also giving you rewards for like being very fast and so on. So it was kind of trying to appeal the both ends of the demographic spectrum. But we also went further into this with accessibility options. And so in the accessibility settings, the two main things that were very, very useful were game speed and game bullets. So this is something that we added pretty quickly into the game, and it was really successful in that regard, because there is a lot of people who found out that they were struggling with the game, and they just go into the accessibility settings and just like slightly reduce the game speed, like 80% or something like this. And they were finishing the game, and then they increased the game speed up to 100%, and it was really cool. We really had some very, very good feedbacks about this, and expert players liked this option a lot, because when we added the option, we forgot to add an upper bound to the options, so you could manage to have a game speed above 100%. And expert players use this to spice the challenge. So it's a typical win-win situation, because we know for a fact that there is at least 15% of players who use the game speed option, and it makes things more manageable for once, and it makes more challenging for the other. So typical win-win. And it was pretty simple to do, because our game was already built in a way that we could change the game speed pretty easily. So not all games are built in that way, but if your game is built in this way, it's a very, very cheap setting to make, and it does so much for so many players. So really a must-have. Another option that we made is the auto slash. So it's a game when you have to make a lot of combos. So basically you mash buttons for smashing enemies and so on. And what we did is the auto slash. So it was just, if you keep pressing the button, the character was slashing automatically. And this was also pretty useful. A lot of players used it, and also expert players used it. For instance, speedrunners. Speedrunners used this option because when they played a lot, they were starting to have like pain in fingers and so on, so they started to use the auto slash for just like relieving some stuff, and it worked very well. Yeah, so another thing that we did is that trying to reduce flashing effects. So we use the fact that our backgrounds are very dark to use them for warnings. So when you were low HP, the backgrounds were blinking in bright colors. So just for you to not look at the interface and just see when you are into the action, to see what's going on with your HP and so on. But some players didn't like it, most obviously, because it's a blinking effect, and sometimes it's really not desirable. And so we just made an option to disable them. It doesn't cost anything to do, and it just suits many players. We also add an option for making HD font, and because the pixelated fonts, it's barely readable to many players. It's more like an artistic choice, but it's very few players will actually use it. So many just go for the comfort and use the HD font. So it's a font, it's this font, this one, which is not pixelated and very readable. And unfortunately, we couldn't use a font that is more readable for other kind of things like dyslexia and so on, because our game is translated into 12 language, and including Asian language and so on. And for now, there is no font that is very suitable for all kind of stuff. So we really didn't wanted to go with like all kind of fonts. We wanted to have something unified, and unfortunately, it's something that we didn't quite manage to put into our game. It's a custom engine, so we couldn't quite do everything we wanted. And one of the most important options that we added, and which was like very useful and which sparked a lot of stories, was the assist on the HP regeneration. And so we had two levels of HP regeneration assistance. One was to drop more HP items in the game, so the game was more generous in drops. And the next level was a full invulnerability. And at first we made the assumption that some players would be reluctant to have an invulnerability into the game, because it would kind of break the achievements, because a lot of people would be able to finish the achievement pretty easily, and some players would be concerned that the achievement would be devalued. So what we tried to do is to trick the players. It was not something that we're very proud of, but we are proud of this. So what we did is that when you activate the invulnerability, you have a small message in the settings that says some achievements will be disabled if you use these options. And it was just a gimmick. It was just a gimmick to reassure the part of players who value a lot the achievements. And in fact, it was not disabling any achievements. So you can absolutely finish the most difficult achievements with the invulnerability on. And in the end, absolutely nobody cared. Out of the 250,000 players, there is only one single person who reached out to us with this concern, telling us that, hey, your achievement still work with the invulnerability. And well, it just worked. And we also verified into the statistics of the achievements, and we compared to our other games to check if people were like pretty much the same on the completion levels, and if achievements very hard were still like also very rare, and it didn't change anything. So the statistics were still very robust, and the most difficult achievements are still very rare. So it really means that people who are using the invulnerability only use it if they need it, and people who value the achievements, they're just like a vocal minority, because it just doesn't work like this. And we also received comments from people telling us that they don't need invulnerability to finish the game, but if the option exists, they would feel the urge to absolutely use it, and it would wreck their experience. But that also doesn't happen. So it's just a mental barrier, but in reality, this kind of stuff just doesn't exist. So just put an invulnerability in your game, and it works wonder, and everybody is going to be happy. It's a really wonderful option. And another fun story about this is that we know how many people are using cheats, like cheat engine or trainers and so on into the game. And we had a lot of people cheating in the game before we introduced this invulnerability option. And we still have a lot of cheaters, even though there is the invulnerability. And the thing is that the cheat codes and the cheats that people are injecting into the game are for adding invulnerability for the game. So our assumption here is that either people don't know that there is an accessibility tab, and is it an act of defiance? Like, are people cheating because they can? And the other thing is that, is it a problem of ableism? Because there is a lot of players who don't even go into the accessibility option just because it is called accessibility, and they feel like, no, this is for disabled people, it's not for me. So it's really a problem of wordings, I believe, and also, of course, a problem of ableism in that regard. So the last milestone, once the game was fully released, when we checked the demography based on all the accessibility work that we made, it was successful because we reduced both N by 5% and we put more people into the 80%. People were just fine. So we added more content and we added more options, and it was very cool. And we also pushed further. We introduced later into the game update a dynamic difficulty, and we made it the default setting for the game. So when you start the game will tell you the game is using a dynamic difficulty now, and the game kind of learns how you are playing, and it removes enemies or it adds enemies depending on your play style. And we still don't have quite many data about this new dynamic difficulty, but it was received very positively, and we already had a lot of messages from people who just told us, hey, I've been able to finish your game. I haven't been able before, and super cool. So dynamic difficulty it's kind of complicated to make, but it's always very good. And I think that working on future games, we are almost likely to make the game with dynamic difficulty in mind. It's really cool. And we don't like to have difficulty options. We don't like to have something that breaks the immersion and like a menu where you select your difficulty. We want things to be more merged into the story, into organic stuff, and so on. And of course, there is a few missed opportunities. One of which was that we designed the game to be playable with only one stick and no aiming and so on. But we still added a manual aiming for PC players or for players who just wanted to have that kind of control. And we made the error to make this the default control scheme. And so by the time the game fully released, our players were already well too used to this manual aim. So what we did is that we reverted to a default of the stick being completely disabled, with a message in the option telling the players, hey, we designed the game for it to work better without the aiming, because players were struggling unnecessarily, but because they wanted to use the aiming, but it was worse than the base game, and they didn't wanted to believe that the auto aim was better for them. And so it's complicated to explain to players, but this is one of the mistakes we made. So if you do something, if you made choice, try to just respect it for the start. So this is one of the things that didn't work. Another thing that we wanted to do but couldn't because of lack of time is a hard of hearing mode, because our sound designer Jonas Turner has a relative who is deaf, and he wanted to make a hard of hearing mode with a bass amplification where you could feel the game more and so on. So this is something that we didn't do because of lack of time. And the other thing is that we wanted to add more control to the binding of the button, and we couldn't too. And for instance, for combos, we wanted to have single binding instead of pushing 2 buttons at a time. And that's pretty much it. So main takeaway is that Meet Your Players accessibility options are most of the time very easy to do. It doesn't cost much and it benefits to a lot of players. And it's usually a win-win situation, because you don't have to be disabled to have some benefits from accessibility. It's just for everyone. So that's it. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to get in touch, feel free. I'm available on Twitter, by mail, on Discord, and I'd be very happy to interact. Bye, have a nice day, and I have a very good JConf.